the Dragon Shed for the last project of the year, and this is quite a considerable project actually. What you see in front of you is the Johnston family nativity scene. I suspect this came out of a kit, kind of a plaster of Paris and moulds kit, and then was painted by my aunts and uncles some point before 72, because the stable itself is a shoebox covered in newspaper, and I've got some prices on the paper here in old pence, so that kind of means that this is at least before 72, and I suspect quite a bit before, but I haven't been able to find any other dates. I might do that when I'm pulling that apart. So my plan is to refurbish all the figures. They're just made of plaster of Paris, so it's not going to take a lot of tools or anything like that, but they're all suffering from different stages of life essentially. So some, when they were made, they weren't the bubbles weren't knocked out of the mould, so I've got the front of the sheep's faces missing on this one, and there's bubbles in the clothes and things like that, and there's also been some problems. So I've got one of my kings and, where is he, and Joseph are both losing their heads. They've been stuck on with Copydex kind of fishy glue, so that's not great, so I need to get rid of that. And pretty much all of them, this one is a good example, have a domed base, where when the mould was filled they weren't levelled out, they were just left domed. So that's probably not helped his head situation really, his stability. They've all got a slight dome or a slight concave or convex or whatever the other one is. So they all need some amount of sorting out, and this poor shepherd has lost his feet as well because of having a very wonky base. So that's kind of the first job, is to basically get these prepped, and that's going to be a small project. I'm going to do it in smallest stages so I can kind of work on it when I feel like it essentially. And what I also need to do is make a new crib, on a new stable, because the paper in this has started to go a bit wonky. It's got a bit damp over time, it stinks. So I'm going to replace this, but what I want to try and do is remove some of the newspaper here and use that for lining the new one. So watch this space, see if that works. So yeah, it's going to be our... Okay, so stage one. I've got some 60 grit masonry sandpaper, so let's get started. So I just want to get them down so they are flat and flush as much as possible. Shouldn't take very much at all. That now sits flat and stable. One down, 11 to go. These have all got a nice flat bottom. I've just gone round with a file and just tied up the edges so there are no sharp bits. So they all stand pretty much solid. This one, even though it is dead flat on the bottom, it's still got a tendency to want to lean. Okay, so I've cleaned off as much of the glue as I can. I don't dare go any further back because I'll be losing the necks really, and as it is these aren't going to have much in the way of support below them anyway. So I'm going to use some epoxy to glue these together because it's gap filling, and just using something like CA glue, super glue, it won't bond that well because there's only a small amount of contact, except for the feet on this one, but I might as well do epoxy on them all if I'm doing it on one of them. So I've started on the painting of my nativity characters here. I'm using kind of a wash on wash off principle, which I think it looks better on this one. Actually gives more of a kind of worn in fabric kind of look. So you start with the base coat and then drop in some shadows and highlights and then just wipe it down, and you end up losing a lot of colour but creating more kind of shadows and texture. So what I'm using is some watercolours, which I forgot I had. I do so much with acrylics that I anything like this, I actually won this for an art prize. Yeah, and it's been at the back of a shelf somewhere, and I was concerned because I'm very low on acrylic paints and haven't had a chance to go out and actually buy a decent amount, so I've fallen back on these, which is fine because these work just as well, if not better, I think, because they don't create kind of a resist the way that acrylic creates kind of a waterproof barrier, and that means that doing this kind of wipe on wipe off is a lot more difficult with acrylics. So yeah, these are my 3 shepherds, and they're pretty much done. Oh, he's pretty much done. I like the detail and using that wipe on wipe off to get kind of the texture of the leather and stuff in his bag and whatnot. The bottoms and the bases, I'm going to do them all at the same time, so I'm using the same colour on all of them. So that's as far as I'm going with him, but I need to sort out his sheep. And I've got one freestanding, one here, and I've also got this chap here who's playing some pipes, and there's a certain Scottish part of me that's saying this should be bagpipes, and that's what I'm going to go with. Actually, I'm going to lean towards bagpipes. I've already started with this green base coat, and I'm going to try and recreate our family tartan. It's a little bit excessive and definitely not at all accurate, but I think the idea of having our family tartan on the family's nativity scene is appropriate. So that's kind of the next job to do, and then sort out these other faces. This one was quite a good face. There wasn't any repairing that needed doing, but both of these needed noses adding. And my carving isn't great, so now I've got to try and pick up on the details with a lack of skill. But anyway, all of these parts or pieces have had a base coat of masonry paint. Now I've just transferred that into a smaller jar so it's less likely to spill, because I know what I'm like. So they've all had this very basic base coat, which is a nice flat base coat, so again, working with watercolours works better on a flat base coat. So I've got my very smallest brushes and they're all looking rather tired, so this may be an excuse to get some more brushes at some point, but it's on the list of things to get and that list is getting longer and longer. So my 2 side pieces are pretty much dry. So I'm kind of debating whether or not I should stick some filler in. I don't know, I think that's probably smooth enough. I actually think it's a bit too smooth. I'm going to go over these with a bit of sandpaper just to get rid of the clean surface, because they got a clean surface because they're lolly sticks. So I want to rough them up a bit so that when I add some stain it'll actually kind of pick it up, because otherwise it will resist a little bit. But these are pretty much done. I'm quite happy with them. Really sturdy. So that's that bit done. And now I'm working on the actual plywood surface. So I've managed to rescue a lot of, well, probably about a third of the paper that's come off the old box. Some of it was so tightly kind of bound together that I couldn't get it out, and some has got kind of some damp issues in, so I wasn't going to use that. So I've got a bucket's worth, which should be plenty for this. And in the process of pulling these off, I managed to find a date. I don't know how it's going to come out on camera. So it's Monday 28th 1968. Pages from the Daily Mirror. So in terms of archaeology, I'm going to place this piece somewhere on the back, I think, so there's actually a visible date, just because. But thinking about my dad's family, Dad was born in 63. No, he wasn't, he was born in 53. So he was about 12 at this point, so maybe he had a hand in it, but no, my dad probably not. He's not really an artistic type. I suspect my aunts did, who are just slightly older than my dad. I also think maybe my nan, she was always rather creative. She did oil painting and that kind of thing. So I'm not sure who's responsible for this originally, but I hope that whoever they are, whichever level of the family they are, that they kind of appreciate I'm doing a redux in a kind of respectful way. So I'm now working on the roof shingles. More lolly sticks. And my first row are a little shorter, so I only want a little bit of an overlap here. These are about an inch, these top ones. And I've made a template. Now, word of warning, if you're making a template of the same material that you're making everything else out of, make sure you write template on both sides so you don't end up sticking it to your box, which is what I've done with the little one I made. Anyway, learning experience. So I've got the ruler here to kind of help guide the top edge of these. So I'm gluing the top here, and I'm also putting a little bit on the top here, so that I've got 2 points of contact. It should give a nice strong bond for these, as each layer hereafter has 2 points of contact, so that should stop them from ever coming off, really. So I've given this a couple of washes with very watered down bronze acrylic, and that's giving it a nice kind of warm colour that is fairly close to the original. So I'm going to leave the back plain like that, and I'm actually going to put the date of rebuild on the bit of crossword I found here, just as a thing, because I've got the actual date this was originally made, or at least the date the papers came from, up here, so I want to put the date of rebuild on here as well, just to give it a bit more history. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's good and solid, there's no movement at all in it, so that's going to have a decent life to it. I might give this a very gentle sand. There's a little bit of grain that's come up. It's not terrible. I do very much like the roof, and I'm still trying to work on an idea for putting a little shelf with a candle on, so that I can have a little star sitting on top. So I think that's kind of appropriate. So I've also now painted around the bases of all of these. So I started with a really dark black outline quite close to the edge, and then filled it in with grey. I'm debating what I'm going to do on the bases, because I think just painting them will be fine, but I don't know. I might put some foam on or something as a base, or some felt, just to give it a softer edge, but I'm unsure. But before I do that, I need to finish off this king with the wonky foot. So I covered the base with filler. I put a little bit of wood in to give it the right height, and he now stands really flat, doesn't fall over. So that's great. So now I'm just going to very gently, although I probably don't need to file for this, I'll chip off some of this and then I'll file the rest. So leave it like that, so the weight of the stable itself holds it and put some pressure on it. And now I'm going to wrap my individual characters. Now I'm debating whether or not to make little bags to put these in so they're easier for kind of storage and transportation. Haven't yet decided on that one, but for the minute I'm just going to go by time. You can see what I've done. I'm not entirely sure about the colouring of this poor donkey, but I think that's about as good as I'm going to get. He's already got a chip out of his ear, which is why you kind of need the extra bit of protection. So I've got a sheep. That sheep doesn't look too bad. I've actually got a nice sheepish face on him. Whereas, ooh, stand up here. This poor fella lost his nose, so he doesn't look great. And this chap kind of looks like Christopher Biggins. It's alright for a shepherd. Okay, other shepherd. Looks pretty good. They're shiny because I've had a shiny varnish on. I was going to use the matte one, but I ran out. So I do kind of like this shepherd here with his bagpipes and the little gold details in our family tartan. That looks quite good. And the cow, I was quite concerned about this, but it actually dried really well, and you get a nice bit of definition on the original moulding with the colours I kind of laid it on there. So to show you the kings, these came out quite well as well. So this one's got a bit of a wonky face. I think I'll leave that. I like the trim around his cloak. I was going to put gilding in between the lines here, but I thought that would be a bit too much, so I've just gone with trim instead. Okay, this one, I love the cloth of gold look. So you've got this gleam inside his cloak. He's picked up some dirt from somewhere, I'm not quite sure where. It should be alright. Like that. And here you can really see the kind of the texture I got from laying on the colour and then just wiping. So you get this kind of slightly worn look, which is nice. And then this, my dandy king, or wise man. I do kind of like him. He's growing on me. I didn't like him very much before, but that was mainly because he kept falling over. But he's now really stable. He doesn't want to tip at all. So quite happy with that one. And then we have Joseph, again with that kind of wipe on, wipe off technique, getting real kind of, excuse you, kind of wear into the cloak here. And then Mary, who I didn't do a lot of wipe off with really, so I kept her quite clean, quite rich in colour. And Mary's always drawn in blue, because blue is was a very expensive pigment, so blue made her more special. So kept her quite simple as well. And then here we have the baby Jeebus, who's lost his feet unfortunately. I couldn't find a way of getting them to stay on. I'm not a good enough carver to really do that right, so he's pointing his toes. You can't see his feet, he's fine. And he hasn't got much of a face because I didn't want to try and then make him a caricature. So that with a little bit of gilding on the straw there. So those are my characters. Now I'm going to give each of these a blanket of bubble wrap, and I may or may not do a little drawstring bag to keep them in, just to keep them safe. So I'm calling this one finished.